Your Town Matters is funded by the Government of Canada through the Local Journalism Initiative and supported by Cactus Media, Canada's independent community television association.
I'm Vicki Hogarth and welcome to Your Town Matters. Communities across southwest New Brunswick have stepped up to the plate in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. My guests today are the Village of McAdam Mayor Ken Stannix and Deputy Mayor Taylor Gallant. Thank you for being here today, Ken and Taylor.
Our pleasure to be here.
Can you tell me a little bit about how your community responded to the pandemic? From the onset of finding out what was happening, what was the immediate response of council?
I think as soon as we saw the virus starting to spread in China, and then certainly after it got over into the Italian area, we started looking at it pretty closely, and we started putting plans together for the closure of public events within the village. We actually closed down the village a couple of days prior to the provincial move to do that. We have a fairly older population here in McAdam, probably about, Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's around 50-60% of the population that is probably 55 and older here in the community. And what we were seeing was that it was elderly folks that were primarily being adversely affected. So we thought, given that background, that we should act preemptively.
How were you able to communicate with the town? I know that you were very active on your website. Can you talk to me a little bit about doing Zoom meetings for town council meetings instead? How did you immediately respond to changing your communication to get messages to people?
Taylor's pretty up on the communication, so I'm going to hand it over to him on this one.
Yeah, so the first thing we did is we designated a communications person, which is one of our staff members, and they've been responsible for updating the website, Facebook. It's been kind of challenging because normally we depend on a bi-weekly newsletter called the McAdam Lions News, but with the pandemic, they weren't sending out their newsletter, so it's been mostly the website, Facebook, and more recently, in the past couple months, to keep citizens aware of what's going on in the community, we've been doing live Zoom meetings for our council meetings. And I think thus far we've had a few glitches, but I think thus far it's been fairly successful with good feedback.
How did your community as a whole respond to the pandemic, looking back now?
I think as a whole, the community was very, I want to say, dedicated to closing down the virus in the village, or not allowing it to get a grip here. A lot of people canceled their events. There was pretty solid social distancing, and as with everywhere, it's not 100%, but for the majority of folks, they took it seriously. We had our 3 restaurants closed. One has since reopened for takeouts. We had another business that closed its doors, hopefully not for good, but during the self-isolation or the social distancing phase of it. So we've been pretty fortunate that way. Our major industries, Salinos and Certainty, have remained open. We've not had any negative impact at the manor, where we have 70 employees there. So overall, we've done very well as a community, I believe.
Were there any local initiatives, such as grocery delivery, that took place to keep the residents safe? How did people step up to the plate in the community?
Taylor started a bit of a process there, so I'm going to hand that over to him.
This wasn't particular from council, but I do know the independent store, they were taking phone calls, doing deliveries, and I believe they're still doing that. And they also did mobile debit, so folks could stay right in their car and they'd bring the debit machine out. So that was very helpful, especially for the senior population, who is a little bit more susceptible to virus and whatnot. So that was very helpful for the senior population.
As we enter the yellow phase of opening up, what are the challenges ahead?
I think the challenges that we're going to be facing is how do we normalize social distancing? As we saw probably a couple of weeks ago, as the province and the premier was advising that we were going to yellow, we saw the number of infections decreased to zero. It remained there for quite a long time. And I think that gave people a sense of security. They were starting to feel that we had dodged the bullet. And I think people started to relax, especially when we went into the two-family bubble idea. So immediately you saw people relax their social distancing. And I think with the current outbreak that has occurred in Campbellton and in that area, that self-isolation is starting to move back. So there's a renewed caution, certainly within the population. But also there is that desire to return to our old normal. And I think that's going to be the hardest thing going forward, is getting used to that, what many people call the new normal, which is the self-isolation. Just as an example, when I was out shopping the other day, I didn't find it a particularly pleasant experience because I'm used to going into a store, wandering, taking a look at different things, and in a very relaxed atmosphere. And that relaxed atmosphere has dissipated with the social distancing aspect of going to a store and having a look around. You're always conscious of the people around you and how close they are. So there's that new norm that we're going to have to try and get used to. It will come, I have no doubt of that. But we will need to ease our way into that and become more comfortable, I think.
Has that complicated any issues for you now that we're going to summer and things like campgrounds are opening? How do you approach things like that?
Well, actually, Taylor looks after the campground here in McAdam, so I'm going to hand that question over to him.
It's been challenging because I know, especially at our campground where it's smaller compared to most, it's a great big family there, and they haven't seen each other for all winter long. But we're working through that. We have appropriate signage. We're only permitting those who have sewer hookups. So no tenters are allowed, only for the sake that our washrooms are closed as well. So the camping season is a little different this year, but we're still continuing on. One of the biggest disappointments is that we did have a planned expansion this year for 9 new seasonal lots, which we had to defer to a later date.
Now, I know that many communities are finding creative ways to do things that used to be traditions, such as Canada Day, and I know McAdam's leading the way in terms of finding a creative solution to celebrating Canada Day this year. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're doing?
Yeah, this was an idea that was brought forward by Vicki Hogarth. She's our rec director here in the village. And her idea was to, since we can't have a parade and we can't get together on Canada Day, let's celebrate Canada Day by every individual dressing up their lawn so that people then can go and drive around the community and see aspects of Canada Day in everybody's yards. So we have no idea what's going to be put out there, but we think that the creativity of people should be quite interesting to see. And I think it'll provide a true Canada Day because we'll be able to drive around and see different people's perspective on what Canada Day entails. The other thing that we're doing is we are looking at some other events. Now, I shouldn't call them events, but little things that we might be able to do within the community. But those are going to have to be handled with the social distancing and those other aspects. And we're not quite sure how we get there from here. We're kind of looking at it right now. But we feel that this Dress Up Your Yard Day for Canada Day, so everybody can see your Canada spirit. I think that's going to go over very well here.
Now, you're also a border community like many other communities in Southwest New Brunswick. What issues has that posed, having a town just on the other side of the border so close by?
Yeah, it's probably very similar to what's happening in St. Stephen and Calais area. But here, if we take a look at the other side of the river, we have certainly Vanceboro. Those folks used to come over here to buy their groceries. They used to come over here to do socializing. There's a lot of friendships across the border and families. That has died out from the perspective of Americans can't come across the border to visit or to shop. So what that has done to them is has forced them to drive down to either Holton or Calais to buy groceries and do those kinds of things. From the Canadian perspective, what that has done is there's several people in McAdam and in the surrounding area that have cottages on the American side of Stannix Lake, and they are not able to get to their cottages this year because of the border closure. The Canadians on this side from McAdam used to go over and buy cheaper gas in Vanceboro and cheaper milk. Certainly they're not able to do that either. So it helped. The distancing and the border closure affects people in different ways, but in each person's life, that normalcy has been lost.
What effect has the pandemic had on the local economy in general?
I don't think it's had a. It depends on the business. Certainly, our industrial side, I don't think has been too adversely affected by the COVID-19. We've not had any illnesses in the community. Production has remained apace. Small business people have, some of those folks have been adversely affected. Certainly the restaurateurs have been, two of them, as I said a little earlier, have closed. One is, I think, was opening again today, and one of the other ones had remained open for takeouts only. And then there was certainly the hairdressers have been adversely affected by this. So some people have been affected pretty badly. Cash flow issues certainly prime amongst those because the bills don't stop, but the cash coming in basically has for these smaller businesses. So from that perspective, I think that's the greatest hit that we've had. From the social side, I would have to say normally people here get together many times during the week in the evenings to play cards, socialize, go to church, do these other things that make us who we are and combine us with the community. But those things now have been lost. Now Zoom has been a good benefit for these folks. For example, I played just the other day with some friends of ours. We played what we call Zoom bingo, and one person sets it up. You have 4 or 5 couples. They all get together on Zoom, and they play. We played bingo for 45 minutes or 40 minutes, whatever the time frame was on the Zoom. And it was a good opportunity to get a chance and just talk to people. So technology is giving us new ways of staying connected with our friends. Now, some of the older folks are not hitting on that, depends on the individual. But I think that McAdamites and people in general are creative, and they will find ways to supplant those ways of socializing in the past to the new ways of socializing.
Now, municipal elections were supposed to happen in May. Has that affected council at all? Are all the councillors willing to stay on for as long as it takes to hold elections again?
Over to you, Taylor.
Yeah, as far as I know, I think all the councillors and I know the mayor is going to stay on until the next election's called, at least.
Can you speak a little bit, Taylor? I know that you were first elected to council when you were 21 years old. Can you maybe give some words to young people who might be watching this who are potentially interested in running for council about your experience?
Sure. It's been very challenging, but very rewarding. I'm a very impatient person, so I want things done yesterday. But for me, I kept on waiting for somebody else to step up to the plate and make the hard decisions and represent citizens. And when not as many stepped up as I'd like to see, I thought, why can't I do it? So for any young people out there, I think it's very important to get engaged and get involved, because the decisions that's made today affect 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen that small communities such as McAdam get an international spotlight for initiatives you've taken, such as, I believe it was $1 lots, Ken? Can you speak a little bit about how you started an initiative to bring people to McAdam to move there?
Yeah, Taylor was a good a focal point on this as well. I guess about 5 years ago, we saw that the village was in decline. So I got together with the then Mayor Frank Carroll, and we sat down. We said, okay, I see a village in decline. What are we going to do to turn it around? And so the first thing we did was we had a town meeting, or a village meeting. We had over 200 people come to that meeting. We then looked at the pros and cons of the village. What was going right? What was going wrong? What were the positive things in the village? What were the negative things in the village? And then from that meeting, we set up what we called the McAdam Community Action Group. And Taylor was an original founding member of that. And what we did was we sat around with about 10, 12 people. And we said, what are the things that we can do to promote the village? And although there were many, many ideas that came forward, and many of those were acted upon, one of those ideas was the dollar lots. I think Taylor and I had both been doing some research on how we can attract, or how we could attract people to the community. And we looked back at history, and we saw Canada had a history of inviting people to come buy property for low prices, or to give them 50 acres to start farms, for example, out in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. So there was a history there. There were some towns in the United States that had tried it. There was, so we took a look at it. It took us about 2 or 3 years to kind of put it all together. As we took over from the municipal perspective after we were elected, we started implementing some of the ideas that the MCAG had brought forward. And one of those was to beautify the community by taking down old houses. And we had identified 25 derelict or unsightly premises. And out of those 25, we've now accomplished in taking down 20 of those buildings. So out of those, to give you an example, as soon as we started taking those buildings down, people started taking interest in their own properties, and new people started taking a look at the village and saying, there's a nice little community, I think I could move there. So to give you an example, I think it's now over 100 homes that we have sold here in the last 3 years to newcomers. The population has increased from 1150 to 1250. And the expansion of the campground will bring that to another 50 folks during the summer months. So we started, as these houses started selling, we had increasing interest in purchasing building lots within the community. And that's when this dollar lot idea really started to take hold with council. And so we looked at where do we find the properties that we could sell for $1. And so we located properties, we worked a deal on that. And then we had 16 properties that we could put out. And as you know, about 1.5 years ago, we put those out just before Christmas for offer. We were inundated. We had over 600 people call and register with us in about the first 2 weeks. We had all kinds of issues trying to keep track of who called when, and so because we wanted it done on a first come, first served basis. So we were pretty sticky on making sure that people who called first were offered first for these lots. So those lots now, 15 of them have sold. I think the 16th one probably sold last week, but I won't know until I get into the office later today or Tuesday, Wednesday. So it's been a really positive, it's had a really positive effect on the community, and that will bring in addition another 50 people to the community, we estimate, over the next year. So when Taylor and I were first elected, we came in, we had a population of about 1,150. We feel next year we should have a population of about 1,350 people here living in the village.
Wow.
So it has brought a lot of notoriety. The dollar lots, in addition to bringing people here to buy homes, it has also brought people who are interested in setting up businesses here in the village. COVID-19 has kind of set us back, put us on pause probably for about 1 year. But once we get moving forward next year, hopefully they'll have a vaccine and that will bring normalcy back. But we see future growth. There's still a lot of people, business people, interested in coming here. We've had 2 new homes. One is going in actually today. And there's another new home. And these are beyond the dollar lots. And another home will be coming in within the next couple of weeks. So it is growing here. People are putting their faith in the community by building new homes. And we think that that will continue.
Do you think maybe one of the silver linings to the pandemic is that a place like New Brunswick, small town New Brunswick, will become a place even more so that people want to move to after this?
Yeah, we've actually had people comment on the fact that they want to move out of the cities into a quieter area to retire or to raise their families. I know one couple that purchased one of the lots here from Montreal. That's what they were looking for. Their big thing was, what is your bandwidth on your internet? And we told them it was a gigabyte. And they said, yeah, that's all we need. They both run their own businesses from home. They just need the internet capability. And they have young children. So it's a win-win for the community. It's a win-win for the province, and it's a win-win for the individuals. So yeah, it's there's that aspect to it as well. One of the issues that we have with the population growth in the village is making sure that we have enough water to support that growth that we've talked about, going from 1,150 to 1,350 and more. So the old water system it pumps out 65 to 80,000 gallons a day. It was put in place in the 1980s. At that time, we had about 240 houses hooked into the water system. Since then, we've increased that to about 420, 440 houses that are hooked into the system. Plus, we have some industry that's hooked into it. And 3 years ago, when we had our drought here in the province, we started bouncing up against that 80,000 gallon limit, and we thought we were going to stress our aquifers. So we had to go out and ask people to not wash cars, not water their lawns, those kinds of items. And so we knew we had an issue because we were going to continue the growth of the village. So we needed more water. So what we did was we hired an engineering firm to come in and try to locate 4 or 5 different places where future wells might be drilled. We estimate we found some spots that we think we can get the wells into the current system. They're in different aquifers, so we won't stress the aquifers we're already in. And we'll take that from 80,000 max to about 155,000 gallons a day. And so these wells are pretty important to us. And so we have invested pretty heavily in that from a village perspective, and certainly we will need federal and provincial funding in the future to help us with that. So we're working with both levels of government to secure that funding, and we think that it's pretty positive that we will achieve that within the next year.
Finally, Ken and Taylor, what are the challenges going ahead for the next year as we go into the next phases of recovery?
I think for the next year, the major challenges that we're going to face is coming to grips with the new reality of social distancing and how we accommodate that within not only our society, but in the village's society. How do we maintain our social cohesiveness? How do we maintain friendships? How do we do those kinds of things? If we have a recurrence of the COVID-19 in the province, certainly we're going through a bit of it right now, and we're hopeful that they will be able to contain that. But we keep talking or hearing about the potential for a second wave coming in the fall with the flu season. How do we address that? We start looking at next year. How do we accommodate people to come in and build those homes on those 16 lots? How do we keep business moving forward? Because a lot of the businesses here are demand driven, just as they are everywhere. Are the consumers within society going to continue their consumption patterns? Or are they going to scale back, and will that adversely affect industry within the village, stores within the village? So that we have those kinds of concerns. We also have concerns about will we be able to, certainly at this point, we think we'll be able to conduct the expansion of the campground next year, but will we be able to do that? What kind of a situation will we be facing a year from now? And then how do we plan and move forward from here to there? So those are the major concerns that we have.
Well, thank you both for joining me today and for all that you're doing for your community.
Thank you very much, Vicki.
Thanks for
having us on.
That was Ken Stannix, Mayor of the Village of McAdam, and Deputy Mayor Taylor Gallant. I'm Vicki Hogarth, and this has been Your Town Matters.